I stood at the edge of the bridge, my hands trembling as I gripped the cold iron railing. Below me, the river churned with the urgency of the storm clouds above, dark and heavy, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. I could hear the rush of water, but it was muffled and distant, like the world around me was fading into silence. The anniversary that had once promised love and celebration now felt like a lie. The same river that once felt like a tranquil escape from the noise of the world now mirrored the chaos inside me. I'd told myself this was just a bad night, that it would pass like so many before. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a bad night. Something had broken. Something unspoken between us had finally cracked wide open. The sound of footsteps behind me snapped me out of my daze. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My heart was racing, and yet I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching this moment from afar like someone else was living this reality, not me. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," came his voice, distant yet sharp, cutting through the fog in my mind. My husband's voice, the voice of the man I had once promised forever to. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but the words wouldn't come. What was there left to say? All I could do was stare at the water, the dark abyss below, wondering if it would swallow me whole, if it would take me away from the hurt. But I wasn't sure I wanted that anymore. Something about the pain felt different tonight, raw and unrelenting, but honest. "Do you ever wonder if we've been pretending this whole time?" he asked, his voice strained, almost as if he were asking himself more than me. His steps were closer now, and though I didn't turn to face him, I felt his presence, looming, like the storm threatening to break above. I didn't respond. What was there to say? I wanted to tell him that I had been pretending too, that I had been holding on to something that no longer existed, but the words choked me. My mind was spinning, racing back through memories of the life we'd once shared, moments of laughter, joy, and connection that seemed so distant now. How had we gotten here? "I'm sorry," he muttered, and I could hear the weight in his voice, but it wasn't an apology for what I thought it would be. Before I could comprehend what was happening, he grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the railing with a sudden force that took me by surprise. I stumbled, trying to break free, but his grip was relentless. "I'm finally free," he screamed, his voice breaking as if the words were an exhale of something long suppressed. And then, in a movement so fast I couldn't react, he threw me toward the edge. The world tilted. The roar of the water below grew louder, swallowing everything in its path. And then darkness. This moment marked the beginning of something I wasn't prepared for, something I never thought could happen. But it had. My body plunged into the cold, rushing water, my heart thundering in my chest, my breath stolen by the shock of the impact. The world went quiet, and then the water closed in around me, cold and suffocating. And as I struggled to stay afloat, a single thought echoed through my mind: he really did it. He meant it. The water was colder than I'd expected, a shock that immediately seized my breath and sent panic coursing through me. My limbs flailed instinctively, the current stronger than I could have anticipated. I had always considered myself a strong swimmer, someone who could navigate any challenge thrown my way, but now, in the pitch-black night, with the storm howling around me, I couldn't escape the fear creeping into my chest. But there was something more unsettling than the icy water or the rush of the current, the crushing realization that I didn't know what to do next. I wasn't sure if I was trying to survive the water or the life that had led me here. I managed to break through the surface, gasping for air, eyes wide, searching for a way out. The bridge loomed above me, a dark silhouette against the storm. The sound of my husband's voice, his frantic declaration, "I'm finally free," repeated in my mind, each echo cutting deeper. I had to get out. I had to make sense of this. Of him. A few hours earlier, before the storm had cast a shadow over everything, I still believed that we were okay, or at least I'd convinced myself that we were. I had tried to believe that the silence that often stretched between us in the past months was just a phase, something we'd overcome. But tonight, everything felt different. The tension in the air, the way he seemed to withdraw, his frustration building in every glance. Something in him had broken, and maybe somewhere deep inside, I had known it was only a matter of time before the dam cracked. The anniversary dinner had been nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't the romantic evening I'd dreamed of, candles flickering in soft light, soft words of affection passing between us. Instead, there'd been arguments, a coldness in the air that hung heavier than the pleasant banter of years past. Small things, snide remarks, complaints about the past, about how we had changed. And then nothing. Silence. Just like that. And that's when he had gotten up, abruptly, and told me we were going for a walk. He didn't even look at me when he said it. Now, as the water pushed against me, dragging me closer to the shore, I felt my body ache with exhaustion. But it wasn't just the physical strain, it was the mental and emotional one that gnawed at me. The betrayal was raw. The cruelty in his eyes, "I'm finally free," stung in a way I didn't know how to express. As I fought against the current, I thought of the past year. There had been moments when I felt the distance growing between us, moments where I couldn't tell whether we were clinging to each other out of love or habit. I had been so sure that we could pull through, that the love we had built would see us through the hardest moments. But how could I have been so naive? How had I missed the signs that he was no longer the man I married? And, more painfully, had I become someone he didn't even recognize? I pushed myself toward the rocky shore, feeling the jagged stones tear at my skin as I crawled onto solid ground, gasping for breath. There, on the damp, windswept rocks, I sat, cradling my aching body, and thought of how everything had led me there. It wasn't just a broken marriage, it was the collapse of everything I had believed in. And yet, even in my pain, something stirred in me, a fire that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had never told anyone about the darker side of my relationship with David, the side that had quietly gnawed at the edges of our life, like a slow-burning fire no one noticed until it was too late. My best friend, Emily, had tried to warn me. She had always sensed something was off, always seen the cracks that I was too afraid to acknowledge, but I had dismissed her warnings, thinking she didn't understand. David was complicated, yes, but he wasn't capable of the cruelty that had now pierced through our lives. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Emily had asked me, just days ago. Sometimes we stay in things because we're afraid of what happens when we don't. I had laughed it off, brushing away her concerns with a wave of my hand. She was just being dramatic, as usual. "It's fine," I had assured her. "We're just in a rough patch. We'll work through it." Now, sitting alone on the shore, shivering and drenched, the weight of her words hit me with full force. What if I had stayed too long? What if we both had? The tension in my chest didn't ease, even as the rain started to fall harder, washing away my tears and mingling them with the storm. It wasn't just the fear of what had happened tonight, it was the uncertainty of what was to come. How could I go back? How could I ever face him again? And yet, there was a strange sense of clarity starting to form in my mind, like the first rays of light breaking through the storm. I couldn't undo what had been done, but I could choose what came next. What was I really afraid of? Was it the loneliness of facing life without him, or the deeper realization that I had lost myself somewhere along the way? I wasn't sure, but one thing was clear: I couldn't stay in this place of doubt, of pain. Not anymore. The storm outside had nothing on the storm inside me. It was time to face it. As I pulled myself to my feet and wiped the water from my eyes, I knew I wasn't just walking away from a broken marriage. I was walking away from the woman who had been too afraid to see the truth, too afraid to take a stand. And now I had to figure out who I would be once I crossed that bridge. The cold night air bit at my skin, but I didn't notice it anymore. My body was numb, my mind still reeling from what had happened. What should have been a milestone and anniversary, a celebration of us, had instead become a defining moment that I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. I had never felt so torn, so utterly adrift. The city lights across the river seemed so far away, yet they taunted me, promising a life I wasn't sure I even wanted anymore. I walked for what felt like hours, though I couldn't say exactly where I was going. I just knew that I couldn't go back to him, not yet. Not like this, not after everything. The night stretched on, my thoughts tangled in a mess of confusion, hurt, and the realization that I had been living a lie. But what now? Now. I couldn't go back to our apartment, not with the memories of our arguments and his face still fresh in my mind. I couldn't look at him, not after what he'd done, what he'd said. And yet, a part of me ached to make sense of it, to understand, to hear him say that it was a mistake, that he didn't mean it, that he still wanted us. The other part of me, though the part that had been bruised, the part that had hidden in the shadows of our marriage for so long, whispered something else. You don't need him anymore. You need yourself. I stopped at a park bench, shivering slightly from the wet clothes clinging to me, though the numbness of my emotions drowned out the discomfort. I pulled my knees up to my chest, wrapped my arms around them, and closed my eyes, listening to the soft rhythm of the rain as it began to slow. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. I can't go back, I thought, but could I move forward without understanding what had happened? Without knowing if I had any place in the world without him? My phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. I flinched. It was him. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen as the messages stacked up, one after another. I had to read them. I had to know. "I'm sorry. Please, don't leave. I didn't mean to hurt you." I was just so angry. I didn't know how to deal with it. The words were frantic, desperate. He was begging me to come back, to understand, to forgive him. And for a moment, I was torn. Maybe it was a mistake, I thought. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe we can work this out. But deep down, a voice whispered that I had already known the truth for too long. That this mess we had created wasn't just a rough patch. It was the result of years of neglect, of living side by side without really living together. I had let myself stay in a place where I no longer felt seen, felt heard. I set the phone down, trying to push the thoughts away. It wasn't the time to make decisions based on emotions alone. I needed space. I needed clarity. The next morning, the world seemed quieter. The city was calm. The storm that had raged the night before was now nothing more than a memory. But the tension inside me hadn't dissipated. I spent hours pacing, my mind racing, unsure of what to do next. That's when I decided to reach out to Emily. I hadn't told her about what had happened. Not yet. She wouldn't judge me. I knew that. She would just listen. And I needed someone to listen, someone who would help me untangle the mess inside me. When I called her, her voice was gentle and concerned. "Are you okay? I've been thinking about you all night. You just disappeared." "I don't know what to do," I confessed, my voice breaking. He threw me off the bridge, Emily. And I don't know if I can ever go back to him, but I can't just walk away either. I'm so lost right now. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she responded. "He what? Oh my God, are you okay? You need to get out of there, away from him now." "I don't know if I'm ready for that," I whispered, feeling a wave of doubt wash over me. I'm scared. I'm scared of losing everything, of losing him, of losing what we were. "You've been scared for a long time, haven't you?" Emily said softly, her words cutting through the fog of my emotions. "You've been letting yourself stay because it's easier than facing the truth. But you need to decide if he is worth holding on to." Her words landed in the quiet of my heart like a sharp truth. Is he worth holding on to? The question echoed in my mind as I hung up the phone. The answer seemed obvious, but every part of me recoiled at the thought of letting go. The weeks that followed were a blur of uncertainty. I stayed with Emily for a while, unsure whether I was hiding or healing. During that time, I had a lot of conversations with myself, conversations about what I wanted, about who I had become, and about the future. But despite all the introspection, one thing was clear: I was not the same person I had been before. David's messages continued. He sent flowers. He showed up at Emily's apartment. He tried to guilt-trip me into coming back, saying things like, "You're the only family I have left and you're throwing away everything we built." And each time, the guilt surged inside me. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I should go back. Maybe we can work things out. But the truth, the real truth, was that I didn't want to go back. I was scared, but I didn't want to go back to a life where I had lost myself. And as much as it hurt, as much as it terrified me, I knew that the only way forward was to let go. I just didn't know how to do it yet. The turning point came when David showed up at Emily's apartment unannounced, this time in the dead of night. I was standing at the window when I saw him outside, pacing like a caged animal. I knew, without a doubt, that this was the moment that would define everything. I was done waiting for him to fix things. I was done being scared. I was done questioning myself. I opened the door. "I'm done, David," I said, my voice steady, though my heart hammered in my chest. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that things will get better when they won't." His face contorted with disbelief. "You don't mean that. You can't mean that. We are going to fix this." "No," I replied, my voice shaking but resolute. "You're going to fix it, but not with me. I can't stay in something that's broken beyond repair." "No," I replied, my voice shaking but resolute. "You're going to fix it, but not with me. I can't stay in something that's broken beyond repair." And in that moment, something shifted within me. I wasn't the scared woman from before. I wasn't the one who had to hold on to a sinking ship because I feared the ocean. I was finally ready to swim. I stood there in the darkened hallway, the door to Emily's apartment still open behind me. David was on the other side, his breath heavy, his eyes wide with disbelief. There was a flicker of hope in his gaze, as if the words he had heard hadn't truly sunk in yet, as if he still believed there was a way to undo the damage, to put the pieces back together. I wasn't sure when it happened, but at that moment I realized the weight of everything I had been carrying for so long. All the years of pretending, all the months of trying to hold it together for the sake of love, of keeping up appearances, of hoping that things would magically improve if I just worked harder at it. But now, the exhaustion of it all hit me. It wasn't just the relationship that was broken, it was me. I had let myself be something I wasn't. I had buried my voice for the sake of someone else's needs. And now, standing before David, I knew that I couldn't keep doing that. Not anymore. "You don't get it. Do you?" David's voice cracked, desperation creeping in. His hands shook at his sides, his chest rising and falling in erratic gasps as though he was physically fighting for breath. "You can't just walk away from everything we've built. We're family, Ellie. I love you." The words were meant to pull me back, to make me doubt myself, to convince me that the life we had was worth saving. But inside, something shifted. There was no more space left for doubt, no more room for guilt. The ache in my heart, the years of silently enduring, had reached its breaking point. It wasn't about love anymore, it was about survival, about reclaiming my own life. "I don't love you anymore, David," I said, the words tasting like iron on my tongue. The finality of them was more painful than I expected, more raw. I haven't loved you in a long time, not in the way you want. And I'm sorry, but I can't stay. I saw his face tighten, his lips curling into something darker, something unrecognizable. His eyes narrowed, the desperation replaced by something colder, sharper. His voice dropped an octave, filled with a sharp edge that made my stomach turn. You think you're better than me? That you can just walk away and leave everything behind? Do you know how much you've hurt me? How much you're throwing away? It was like a switch had flipped. The man I had married, the man I had once loved, was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who saw our relationship as a possession, something that was his by right. But I wasn't his. I wasn't anyone's. It was mine. And for the first time, I felt the power of that truth run through me like a current. His anger escalated, his body tensing as if he were preparing to lash out, to force me back into his world. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought he might. I stepped back instinctively, feeling the fear rise in my chest. It wasn't the first time his anger had frightened me, but this was different. I wasn't backing down now. Not anymore. Don't you dare come any closer, I said, my voice trembling but firm. My heart pounded in my ears as I stood my ground. His eyes darkened. He stepped toward me, and I took a shaky step backward, the panic in my chest rising. This wasn't just about us. This was about everything I had feared. The physical confrontations, the emotional manipulation, the way he had always found ways to guilt me into staying. I was terrified, but I wasn't going to give in. Before I could react, he raised his hand just a quick, swift movement and slapped it against the doorframe with such force that it rattled the walls. I flinched, but the sting of it didn't reach me the way it would have before. Ali, he growled, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. You'll regret this. You think you can walk away from me, from us, but you can't. You'll never be free. His words hit me like a slap across the face, but they no longer held the power they once did, because deep down I realized the truth that I had been denying for so long. I had been afraid of losing him, of losing the life we had built, but now I saw it for what it truly was, a cage, a prison I had locked myself in, and I was the one who held the key. No, I said, my voice a little stronger now, tinged with defiance. I'm already free, and I'm not going back. I took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage I had left. I'm sorry for what I've put you through, but this is the end of it. I'm done being afraid of you. I'm done being afraid of my own choices. I'm walking away, David. And I don't need your permission. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me, his face twisted with disbelief, anger, and something else I couldn't name. Then, slowly, something seemed to crack in his expression. The fire that had burned so hot in him suddenly dimmed, replaced by something darker, more calculating. You think you can just walk away from me, he sneered, stepping back and shaking his head. You'll regret this. You'll see. One day you'll come crawling back. I swallowed hard, pushing the lump in my throat down, trying not to give in to the fear that crept up on me. I won't. I whispered my words, a quiet promise to myself. I won't. I turned and walked away, out of the apartment, out of the life we had built. The door clicked shut behind me, the finality of it echoing in the hollow space between us. And as I stepped into the night, into the unknown, I felt a sense of weightlessness. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, or what my future held, but I knew, for the first time in a long time, that I was in control of my own story, and that was enough. The next few weeks were a blur. I stayed with Emily for a while longer, and slowly, the pieces of my life began to fall back into place, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. There were moments when I felt the pain of the past creeping up on me, when I longed for the stability of what I had known. But each day, I reminded myself that I had made the right choice, that I had taken control of my life again. I didn't hear from David much after that night. There were messages, but they became more desperate, more pleading until they stopped altogether. I didn't know what had become of him, and part of me felt guilty for not looking back. But I knew that I couldn't be the person I once was. I had to keep moving forward, even if it meant leaving pieces of my past behind. And as I stood at the edge of a new chapter in my life, I could feel the weight of it all, the painful beauty of choosing yourself after so long. The road ahead wasn't easy, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The days after I left were a blur of new beginnings and painful realizations. I stayed with Emily for a few weeks longer, trying to find a way to breathe, to exist outside of the suffocating walls I had been trapped in. I spent hours in her apartment, walking through the city, listening to the hum of life around me, something I hadn't truly heard in years. I was still raw, but the sense of liberation was undeniable. It felt strange, unnatural at first, but with each passing day, the tightness in my chest began to loosen. I reached out to some old friends, people I had let slip away while my marriage consumed me. I reconnected with a version of myself I thought was lost forever, the version who was free to laugh, to make choices without fear, to carve out a life on my terms. It wasn't easy. The guilt weighed heavily, and the shame of having allowed myself to live in a cage for so long still lingered. But I was learning. I was unlearning the behaviors that had once felt like survival instincts but were just signs of me shutting down, suppressing my needs and desires for the sake of someone else's comfort. But it wasn't until I found myself standing at the edge of the river one late afternoon, the sunlight casting golden streaks across the water, that I truly understood what had changed within me. I had spent so many years afraid of being alone, afraid of the unknown, clinging to a relationship that had long since died because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. I thought that love meant sacrifice, and that happiness meant giving everything up for the other person. But as I looked out over the water, watching the ripples spread outward, I realized I had been drowning in that fear. I had been keeping myself from living the life I deserved. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the same woman who had been afraid to leave. It was a woman who had finally broken free, not just from David, but from all the chains I had wrapped around myself. I had been my captor all along, imprisoning myself in a false sense of duty, a false sense of love. And now, standing there by the river, I could see that I was free. I never heard from David after that night. His calls stopped and his texts became fewer, more desperate. I didn't respond. I couldn't. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about choosing myself, about walking away from the version of me that had been afraid to stand up for her happiness. It was about healing from the wounds that had been left behind, wounds I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. There were days when the pain of the past resurfaced. The regret, the longing for something I had believed in so fiercely it would all come rushing back in waves. But I was learning how to sit with those feelings instead of running from them. I was learning how to allow myself to feel the ache without letting it swallow me whole. I would never be the same, but maybe that was the point. The life I was building now wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had to fight for it. And maybe, in a way, that was what I had been searching for all along, the courage to fight for the life I deserved. Not the one I had settled for out of fear, but the one I would create with my own hands, with my own choices. I didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe one day I would meet someone new, someone who understood what it meant to stand on equal ground, someone who would love me not because I gave up everything for them, but because I was whole on my own. But for now, I was enough. I was everything I needed to be. And as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The past no longer trapped me. I was free. With a deep breath, I turned and walked away from the river, my footsteps steady. The journey ahead was mine to make, and I was ready. I am no longer afraid of walking alone, I whispered, my voice soft but sure, because now I know I can stand tall alone.